On this Tuesday night, multiplying calls to investigate foreign meddling.
Governments should err on the side of transparency.
And how Australia's national security chief defines the threat.
There are senior people in this country who appear to believe that espionage and foreign interference is no big deal.
Logging off TikTok, the privacy fears piling up, and the politicians ditching the app. A class act who broke barriers.
I am the teacher. I'm Mrs. Burgess.
The story of Millie Burgess, one of Canada's first black educators. And Ross Lord, a global national original, riding off into retirement.
We're not going to hang around here much longer.
Global National with Dawna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin tonight with calls for greater transparency about the nature of the threat from foreign interference in Canada's democratic process. The Globe and Mail is reporting that China appears to have targeted Justin Trudeau after he became leader of the Liberals in 2013. An anonymous national security source told the newspaper the Chinese government made a $1 million donation to the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation in 2015. It alleges the money was funneled through a Chinese billionaire who was assured the Chinese government would reimburse him for the entire amount. Both Global News and the Globe and Mail have reported allegations China covertly supported candidates, most of them Liberals, in the 2019 and 2021 elections. And there is some breaking news from Ottawa. Our Bureau Chief Mercedes Stephenson is with me. Mercedes, another report into foreign interference just released. What does it conclude?
Well, Dawna, this is the much vaunted report that Prime Minister Trudeau and his cabinet have been pointing to, put together by senior public servants, that would assess whether or not there was foreign interference that affected the outcome of the 2021 election. What this report concludes is that while there were efforts at foreign interference, they were not sufficient to meet the threshold for public notification. It says that Canada was still able to hold a free and fair election, even though it did detect some concerns about foreign interference. But there's two key things to keep in mind here. One is that it only looked at the actual writ drop period, that actual time period that the election takes place. And a lot of the experts are saying the actual interference happens in the nomination process, which is before the general election, and the panel didn't have a mandate to look into that. The second part is that Morris Rosenberg, a very well-respected retired bureaucrat, led this panel. However, he also used to be the CEO of the Trudeau Foundation, and that is something that the opposition has already seized on, so there are much more questions to come.
Another day of intense scrutiny for the Liberal government about who knew what when it comes to Beijing's attempts to interfere in Canadian democracy.
Foreign interference represents a serious threat to our institutions.
Well, sources say the government is increasingly focused on how to deal with China's meddling. Critics say Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his cabinet have been more interested in plugging leaks than plugging holes in Canada's defences. Security experts have long called for a foreign agents registry, like Australia's, or a foreign interference bill to be tabled as the UK has done. But Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino is not budging on specific commitments or calls for an inquiry, delivering the same lines that he's used for weeks on Tuesday in Halifax.
We have put in place exactly the mechanisms and the tools that we need to mitigate against the threats.
Senator Ian Shugart is the country's former top bureaucrat. He says it's time for the government to be more open about the threats Canada is facing and how the government has handled them.
Governments should err on the side of transparency because the public needs that reassurance. And as things get more complicated, there may be greater need for that reassurance.
Former Privy Council clerk Michael Wernick says there is no silver bullet, but there are immediately available steps the government should take right now to make it harder to interfere in Canadian democracy.
Why not fast forward and start on the legislation now, start working on cyber defenses, start working on disinformation, and bulk up our defenses. We don't need the inquiry to start on that.
Mercedes, we're going to come back to you in just a moment. As you pointed out, we're not the only country dealing with this. Members of the so-called Five Eyes, Canada, the US, the UK, New Zealand and Australia are all grappling with foreign interference. That alliance has an intelligence sharing agreement. And last week, the head of Australia's Security Intelligence Organization laid out the threat from hostile foreign intelligence services, not just China, in some pretty stark terms. Here's part of his speech.
The challenge from espionage and foreign interference. And I'm not convinced, as a nation, we fully appreciate the damage it inflicts on Australia's security, democracy, sovereignty, economy and social fabric. I'm concerned there are senior people in this country who appear to believe that espionage and foreign interference is no big deal. It's something that can be tolerated or somehow ignored or safely managed.
And he goes on to say a lot more about the exact nature of the threat. Mercedes, why don't we see a similar level of transparency here in Canada?
Well, there is a growing chorus of voices, Dawna, that say that that's what's necessary in order to deal with concerns that Canadians have about the information we're getting, that everything was okay in these elections, the reassurances from public officials, and that we're not actually hearing the details of what the allegations are and what happened. Now, in fairness, a lot of this is highly classified information that can't be released in public. However, as we just saw, there is a way to do it that doesn't release that information. And yesterday, it didn't seem like there was a lot of an appetite for Mr. Trudeau from that. He kind of took a shot at CSIS. The government has not been happy with the leaks that have been coming out of that organization, but they show no signs of stopping. And when you speak to the sources in these cases, our Sam Cooper has said a lot of the reason for the leaks is that they are simply frustrated with the government failing to act. So until there's more information, there might just be more leaks.
Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa, thanks. Alberta has tabled a big spending budget made possible by soaring oil and gas prices. The timing couldn't be better for the government of Premier Danielle Smith, who faces a provincial election in May. As Heather Yurix-West explains, cash promises, though, may not carry that much weight with voters.
Tremendous honor today to rise in the House and present Budget 2023.
Alberta is spending money, and in an election year, it has plenty of cash to spend. Predicting an oil price of $79 a barrel, the province is projecting $70.7 billion in revenue next year, with plans to spend nearly $67 billion, up $6.2 billion from Jason Kenney's last budget 1 year ago.
In Alberta, over the last 3 years, we did the heavy lifting fiscally. We got our fiscal house in order. We're running a surplus, thanks to very high energy prices, a very significant surplus in the current fiscal year.
Global oil prices mean Alberta has seen the biggest turnaround in fortunes in Canadian history, going from a projected deficit of $18.2 billion in 2021 to a budget forecast surplus this year of $10.4 billion. Next year, the province is projecting another surplus of $2.4 billion. This year's United Conservative government is promising historic increases for healthcare, education, and post-secondary schools, while promising to beef up the province's rainy day fund to $20 billion by the end of next year.
This is a fraudulent budget designed to buy votes ahead of the election and then spring the costs on Albertans after the polls have closed.
Still, Alberta remains reliant on what's never been reliable: energy revenues that are set to drop as early as next year. By then, though, Albertans will have already been to the polls. Dawna?
Heather Yurix-West at the legislature in Edmonton, thanks. It was budget day in BC, too. The NDP government there projecting a more than $4 billion deficit in a budget packed with new spending aimed at healthcare and affordability. BC is dedicating more than $6.4 billion over 3 years for health care, including $1 billion in new funding for mental health and addictions. $4.5 billion will go to a suite of affordability measures over the next 3 years. Those will include a long-promised renter's rebate, expanded carbon tax and child benefits, plus hikes to social assistance. And the province will also introduce free prescription contraception for BC residents starting in April, a Canadian first. Multiple provinces have just banned TikTok on government devices, coming up how some federal politicians are now ditching the app, too. TikTok has about 8 million users across Canada, the majority of them young people. It is no wonder politicians have been eager to use the video sharing platform to connect to that demographic, though as David Aiken reports, that is changing fast.
Hit it, get it, get it. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh easily led the way among Canada's politicians when it came to the social media app TikTok. Singh was a prolific and popular user with 880,000 followers. He mixed in videos featuring wife and daughter with political messages.
Including Pierre Poilievre just voted against dental care.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre also had a pretty good TikTok game. He had 230,000 users. But Poilievre this week shut down his account and Singh put his on pause. Those decisions followed a Government of Canada ban on the use of the TikTok app on any government-issued phone.
This is yet another demonstration of the government's vigilance when it comes to any potential threats that may be posed by foreign interference or any other risks to our cyber platforms and our critical infrastructure.
Some provinces quickly followed the federal lead, banning TikTok. Others are thinking about it. Their moves come on the heels of governments throughout the Western world, including the European Commission and the United States, all worried that China's part ownership in the company that runs TikTok is too much of a cybersecurity risk. China, though, says the U.S. and others are overreacting. We firmly oppose the U.S. side's wrong approach of overstretching the concept of national security, a Chinese government spokesperson said Tuesday. Experts are now calling on governments to educate young people, who make up the vast majority of TikTok users, about the potential risks to privacy and security while using the app. Dawna.
David Aiken in Ottawa, thanks. Passion and perseverance ahead. One of Canada's first Black teachers reflects on her trailblazing career. As Black History Month comes to a close, we are taking a look at the life of a remarkable educator. Millie Burgess started her teaching career in Toronto back in 1957. She was the first Black teacher in Ontario, and she went on to educate and inspire generations of students. Mike Drolet has her story.
2 months shy of her 100th birthday, Millie Burgess still clearly remembers the day she decided to become a teacher. She was 5 years old, living in Bermuda at the time. She practiced teaching on her 8 siblings and loved it so much she eventually was offered a scholarship to Teachers College in Toronto.
When I was coming, people kept saying to me, "You sure you want to go to Canada? Because that's a white country." Yes, and I said, "Oh." I said, "Well, what difference does that make?"
It was 10 years after Jackie Robinson had broken the color barrier in baseball, and Millie decided to take a similar approach to potential prejudices. She'd stand up for herself, but try to educate her critics.
She also fully recognized that this was not Bermuda. This was not a place where the majority population looked like her. And I think for her, she knew that there were adjustments that were just part of being in this country.
The Ontario Black History Society believes that when Millie took her first teaching job in 1957 at Ogden Public School, she became the first Black teacher in the province's history. And she had the fortitude to see it through, like the time she had this exchange with a parent.
He said, "I brought my son to school for the first time." He said, "But where is the teacher?" So I said, "I am the teacher. I'm Mrs. Burgess, the teacher." He said, "Don't you have a white teacher here?" I said, "I'm sorry, but I am the teacher for this class." So I said, "If you have any problems, go see the principal at the office."
That, she says, was the exception. She became friends with many of the parents of the kids she taught. How many years did you teach?
25.
25 years?
25. You had to leave at 25. I begged them to let me stay another year, and they wouldn't let me.
She was passionate about her career. Most pioneers are. Mike Drolet, Global News Toronto.
Next, the stories that stick with you after 39 years of reporting. Our final note tonight is about one of our own. Our Atlantic correspondent, Ross Lord, is retiring. Ross was one of the originals. He's been with Global National since it first went on the air. Here's a look at just a sliver of the many stories he's covered.
If they're concerned about their image being tarnished by going from a delicacy to a fast food item, they're not commenting.
He has a way with words and a way with people that never change, no matter what story he covered.
This is, as you put it, a terrorist attack.
The 9/11 terror attacks happened just after Global National first went on the air in 2001.
Commercial jetliners from all over the world descended on Halifax.
As fear and grief spread, Ross told survivor stories with dignity and grace, as he did with every tragedy that unfolded on his watch.
It provides little consolation for the families of 15 coal miners trapped in the cold, dark ground. The Preserver has a crew of 150, people whose lives might never be the same after spending a full week at the scene of one of the worst plane crashes in Canadian history. A 12-passenger van demolished near Bathurst, New Brunswick. Nearly an entire high school boys basketball team wiped out instantly.
Moncton has had its problems in recent years, but nothing like this.
Using a semi-automatic rifle to kill 3 Mounties and injure 2 others, a crime Crown and Defence call one of the worst in Canadian history.
The more Nova Scotians learn about the shooter's movements, the more grateful some are that they left the areas he visited just in time.
But the snow is only part of the problem.
Storms have a way of chasing Ross. He's probably covered more than any of our reporters.
The blizzard warning came one day ahead of the actual storm. The new federal government is promising to bring back local weather service to Newfoundland communities like Bonavista. And as more roads like this one are closed and the river continues to rise, so does the number of people moving to safety here in New Brunswick. Even though it's not as intense as Juan, Earl is actually 3 times as large. We're not going to hang around here much longer, just in case anything more is brought down.
Here in Port aux Basques today, there is incremental progress in cleaning up some of this debris, but they're still sizing up the immense recovery that lies ahead.
He showcased the wonders of Atlantic Canada.
And the more icebergs we see here in northern Newfoundland, the more questions arise about why. When you're standing this close, the biggest impression is the smell, an estimated 80 tons of decaying blubber.
And pursued those in power.
How are ya?
Good. From holding politicians to account to bringing us the stories of local politics.
As political pressure grows on the government, so does economic pressure on the workers. The upcoming vote has injected something into this community that never existed before: tension.
He's covered international upheaval, including the war in Afghanistan.
Is that about where the rocket landed?
This fire is the troubling symbol of a change in tactic by Afghanistan insurgents. This is the 4th attack on the Kandahar airfield in recent weeks. By establishing an extra base in Afghanistan, the Canadian military is hoping it will have a greater presence in this country. Canada hasn't lost so many soldiers in a combat role in such a short period of time since the Korean War.
And Haiti after the devastating 2010 earthquake.
As soon as the dust cloud settles, scroungers scramble in to try to retrieve anything that might be worth value to them and their families. At this camp, there are 30,000 people living in squalor, afraid that at any moment they or their children will catch a disease.
Reporting on the darkness of human tragedy, but always finding some light.
Gander's part in 9/11 history is fairly well known by now, but what really impresses us and strikes us this time is the lasting connections between the stranded passengers and those who consoled them in their time of crisis. It was hard to know what to expect from a makeshift campaign that lasted only 1 week, but now it's worked. There are 60 tons of food sitting in this warehouse.
And always seeking new insights with intelligence, grace, and humor.
Now, a final wish that might really test your holiday spirit. It's about the hockey team that millions of us have been supporting for longer than we care to mention. Yes, this team. True, they've been scuffling this season, firing the coach and everything. But isn't there a chance, even a small chance, they could come back? I don't know, maybe they win the Stanley Cup? Isn't 53 years of failure enough? Well, they don't call it wishful thinking for nothing, eh?
And Ross is with me now from Halifax. Ross, I bet you still have that Leafs onesie. And I thought you might stick around until the Leafs win the cup.
Not to be, but yes, I do still have that onesie. And I'm still hanging in with them like so many of us across the country, and hoping for the best again this season.
You know, Ross, I hated hearing the news that you're retiring. I told you that. We're all so fond of you. We rely on you so much. So many people have sent you private messages. Here are just a couple from some of your colleagues.
And I'm very lucky to have worked with you even just for a little bit of my career. You're an inspiration to so many journalists across the country.
Ross, our viewers are really going to miss traveling along with you to all of those fascinating corners of Atlantic Canada.
Thank you so much for your public service in journalism for close to 4 decades.
I'm honestly excited that you're finally going to have the time to start writing your own great story.
And what a story, Ross. 39 years in journalism, the arc of your career, the things you've witnessed, the people you've met. I bet you're reflecting on that a bit right now.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for that, those kind wishes from some very kind and talented people. And I have had time to reflect already, and we'll have more time, I hope, but mostly it's a sense of gratitude for being part of a talented and kind group of people like you. I know you don't like to hear this, but I have to say it, extremely nimble in thought and in deed. And so, yeah, it's funny when you think of this day arriving, you're not sure what you will feel in those moments. And I'm really glad. I'm grateful that I feel gratitude, and that's my overwhelming sense today.
Well, Ross, you have devoted so much of yourself and your energy to us, and we're so thankful for that, so grateful for your dedication, and all the best in the years ahead to both you and your family.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks, Ross. That is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Dawna Friesen, and it just seemed right that your candidate tonight is the man himself, Ross Lord, a stellar reporter and storyteller, and a genuine good guy. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.